Good day, everyone. I am Zaldy Dueñas from Dallasal University, Manila, Philippines, and I am here to present my paper entitled A Liberal Feminist Critique of Single-Sex Schools. To give a little background, I wrote this paper as my final requirement in my feminist philosophy class last year, and it was inspired from my experience of working in an all-girls college. That said, this paper examines the debates between single-sex education and co-education or mixed-sex schooling. In particular, it centers on the discussion of gender equity, whether it is best achieved through single-sex education or co-education. To do this, I will present the advantages and disadvantages of good setup to women, such as in view of academic outcomes, and responsiveness to learning needs. Moreover, it will evaluate the importance and relevance of a school's or learning environment sex composition in light of liberal feminism. Liberal feminism asserts that women and men have equal rationality and that women can similarly contribute to society if provided the same education. The ongoing debates on these two learning environments echo the notions of liberal feminists on the importance of education. To start, let us discuss single-sex schools versus mixed-sex schools or education. Mixed-sex schooling or co-education is a form of instruction where males and females are taught together. In contrast, single-sex schooling refers to instruction where the two sexes are taught separately either at a classroom level or a school level. Historically, in primary and secondary education, single-sex schooling has been the norm and the dominant tradition in many nations worldwide. However, this landscape is no longer the case as co-education gradually became more prevalent when mass or public education began to spread. Though outnumbered nowadays, single-sex schooling remains among several public, private, and religious educational institutions, even if its presence varies worldwide. While co-education is currently the norm or the dominant setting, this shift continues to raise scores on the advantages or disadvantages of one type of school environment over the other. That is why we ask which of the two school environments enhances learning better, which has detrimental effects on its students, and if there is a significant difference between their outcomes. These questions clearly show how the topic remains relevant and worthy of critique. On the one hand, there is a long-held prevailing view that suggests that single-sex schools have advantages for girls compared to co-education schools, which present more advantages for boys, they said. This is why much of the literature on single-sex education is related to girls' education. Ace et al. Present two rationales for single-sex education. First, um, they said that it provides a kind of environment free from sexist attitudes and behaviors. For instance, in co-educational classroom, girls must compete for teachers' attention, particularly in male-associated subjects like science and mathematics. Accordingly, graduates from girls' high schools are six times more likely to pursue math or science majors and to participate in sports competitions. Second, single-sex schools adhere to the belief that there are substantial biological differences between the sexes, and that teaching must be tailored to fit the different needs of male and female students for higher achievements. Other than these two rationales, it is said that exposure to an all-female school environment increases women's leadership outcomes or aspirations, rather, civic engagements, and political participation. An all-female school may influence a female student's attitude by providing more leadership opportunities. Moreover, single-sex schools can weaken traditional gender biases for girls by having less pressure to maintain their gender identity in the presence of boys. On the other hand, some argue that educational schools provide a better social environment to students. Studies show that attending A single-sex or mixed-sex school has little impact on girls' motivation in language and mathematics. In one study, it shows that all girls' schools do not show significant positive effects on girls' STEM outcomes. This means that there is inconsistency with the notion that an all-girls classroom provides a more favorable school environment, or that the presence of the opposite sex interferes with their academic development. Additionally, some research has found that students and teachers generally prefer co-ed schools, which are seen as a more congenial environment and tolerant difference. Accordingly, students in co-education schools have more positive attitude toward their schools than single-sex schools. In view of biological sex differences, some argue that the difference between male and female learning traits and abilities are insignificant, and thus tailoring teaching strategies to cater to these differences has minimal impact. In particular, they said that there is no widely accepted evidence that exists that these biological differences impact how girls and boys ought to learn. Furthermore, sex segregation can be viewed to perpetuate stereotypes. One study finds that gender segregated classes strengthen rather than reduce gender stereotype beliefs. The more time students spend in segregated groups, the more likely they are to adopt these groups' collective norms and behaviors. Though there is a vast literature to support both single-sex education and co-education, it is important to recognize rather that these research findings related to the two are mixed and inconsistent. Strikingly, more often than not, these said studies demonstrate contradicting results. This is true in recurring and overlapping trends in areas of single-sex and co-education research, such as academic outcomes, career aspirations, sex differences, gender stereotypes, and gender equity. Accordingly, most studies on how sex composition affects students in their learning environment need to account for other factors like race, culture, socioeconomic background, and school-related variables like school climate, academic standard, class size, and teacher quality for better results. Thus, research findings must be interpreted cautiously, and the generalization of observed effects must be avoided. These mixed findings suggest that there is yet to be a shred of clear evidence to determine which between single-sex and co-education schooling is a better option. With that, we discuss liberal feminism and education and how they relate to one another. Liberal political theory is founded on rights, autonomy, and reason. It declares that humans have the same essential qualities, whatever their differences are. All our bearers of rights have the freedom to exercise those rights and have the rationality to reflect on one's life and engage in public political deliberations. In response to this development, early feminists used the same liberal concepts to argue that women and men have the same human worth. For liberal feminism, women and men are equal, have equal economic, social, and political rights, and have the political and legal system to secure their rights. This highlights the essential role of education in liberal feminism. For liberal feminists, education is the key for women to have the necessary tools to join the public sphere and become full citizens. Education is a force that can free women from the constraints of their private and personal aspects or spheres. It contends that both sexes have the same rationality and that a woman can be a man's equal through education. Hence, education became liberal feminism's main focus through the 19th century and early 20th century. However, while women's movements through the years have won rights for women, the fight against gender inequalities continues. Thus, liberal feminism's commitment to promoting equal education for all and its use for social reform continues to be relevant. The opposing views reflect the varied views and understanding in identifying and determining the best learning environment. It highlights the necessity of equitable education for all, especially for women, that the liberal feminist movement advocates for. We now ask, in what ways can single-sex schools promote the ideals of liberal feminism? Well, liberal feminists are vocal critics of single-sex schooling. In one view, liberal feminists adhere to the assimilationist model that promotes equal treatment between men and women because both have the same rights. Liberal feminists may argue that women and men should be treated equally and educated together. The varying results of single sex learning highlight the complex barriers to achieving gender equity. Thus, instead of creating more single sex schools, we can look at how schools are organized and how gender gaps in education may be addressed by developing a more engaging and inclusive curriculum and pedagogy that promotes equity. In another view, single sex and mixed sex education may indicate making education available and accessible to all, particularly to women. For example, in the United States, the rise of single sex public schools provides low income families options for where to send their children, previously only afforded by privileged families. In addition, though still contested, one popular reason defenders of single sex schools use is the belief that it improves educational experiences and achievements of low income students of colors. In a study involving single sex academies in California, it reveals that state funding for single sex public schools allowed low income and minority students to improve their academic achievement. While we recognize that there are factors and contexts beyond school or class sex composition that can have significant impacts on education's gender equity concern, single sex schools may be regarded as an alternative to co-education schools and make education more accessible to all and maybe one solution to the enduring problem of gender equity in education. To conclude, both forms prove advantageous in the vast literature available about the topic. However, as said, these research results are regarded as mixed and often contradictory. While there is difficulty in determining which school environment is better or superior, studies have shown that effectiveness based on sex composition of classes or schools may depend on some contexts like socioeconomic backgrounds, race, teacher quality, funding, and others. In relation to this, single-sex public schools and amid widespread mixed-sex schools make education more accessible, which is at the heart of the liberal feminist movement. Thus, it should be accessible and available to all women needing it. To answer the problem raised in the beginning of this presentation, this study finds that while we cannot identify which of the two forms is superior or is a solution to the problem of gender equity in education, both have their benefits. Therefore, this paper contends that the growing presence of single-sex schools can be welcome. Single-sex education may be viewed as not simply an alternative but a viable form of education capable of addressing certain learning needs and demands. As mentioned, research outputs have illustrated that single-sex education provides advantages for students from low-income families and minority groups, or that it motivates girls to do better in math and sciences, take leadership roles, and join sports. These insights tell us that there is no one-size-fits-all kind of education. The availability of different forms of schooling, whether single-sex or mixed-sex, allows learners to enroll in a school setting where they can fit or excel. On the one hand, single-sex schools, though outnumbered in the current education landscape, serve as a reminder that the dominant mixed-sex setup has yet to prevail over concerns about gender equity in education. On the other hand, the rising presence of single-sex schools is an opportunity to improve the quality of education in mixed-sex schools and to look at how they are organized to respond effectively to education concerns. This paper highlights the role of education in social reforms, echoing liberal feminism. Society benefits when all members can contribute. This underlines the significance of addressing gender gaps in education so women and those belonging to low-income families and marginalized groups can be empowered to have social and political participation. That ends my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.